Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Metaphors in discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, metaphors are not just literary devices used for embellishment but powerful cognitive tools that shape how individuals perceive, understand, and interact with the world. Metaphors allow us to conceptualize one thing in terms of another, enabling abstract ideas to be communicated through more concrete, familiar terms. They play a crucial role in shaping thought and language, reflecting and reinforcing cultural norms, ideologies, and power relations. Discourse analysts study metaphors to uncover hidden assumptions, ideological perspectives, and the ways in which social realities are constructed and maintained. 1. Conceptual metaphor theory, CMT. Central to the understanding of metaphors in discourse analysis is conceptual metaphor theory, CMT. Developed by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson in their groundbreaking work Metaphors We Live By, 1980. CMT posits that metaphor is not just a figure of speech but a fundamental structure of human thought. According to this theory, metaphors organize our perceptions, actions, and understanding by mapping concepts from one domain, the source domain, onto another domain, the target domain. Source and target domains. In a metaphor, the source domain is the concrete concept from which we draw metaphorical expressions, while the target domain is the abstract concept being understood. For instance, in the conceptual metaphor, time is money. The source domain is money, which is tangible and measurable, while the target domain is time, an abstract concept. This metaphor influences how people talk about time, e.g., spending time, saving time, and reflects a cultural understanding of time as a resource. Example: war metaphors in political discourse. In political discourse, metaphors of war are commonly used to frame conflicts, strategies, and policies. Phrases like war on drugs, fighting poverty, or battling climate change invoke the source domain of war, with its associations of combat, enemies, and victory, to describe social issues. This framing can shape public perception by suggesting that these issues require aggressive, conflict-oriented solutions, even when nonviolent alternatives might be more appropriate. Point 2. Metaphors as framing devices. Metaphors are powerful framing devices in discourse, shaping how we interpret events, issues, or concepts. The choice of metaphor can direct attention toward certain aspects of reality while obscuring others, influencing how individuals and societies understand complex phenomena. In discourse analysis, identifying metaphors helps reveal how speakers or writers position their audience to adopt particular viewpoints. Example: economic metaphors in healthcare. In healthcare discourse, economic metaphors often frame patients as consumers and healthcare as a market. Phrases such as shopping for doctors or healthcare providers compete for patients frame the relationship between patients and healthcare professionals in terms of economic transactions. This metaphor reflects and reinforces neoliberal ideologies that view healthcare as a commodity rather than a human right. It also influences policy discussions, where healthcare may be treated as a market-driven industry rather than a public service. Point 3. Ideological functions of metaphors. Metaphors also serve important ideological functions in discourse. They can naturalize particular ways of thinking, making certain power relations and social structures seem inevitable or commonsensical. By mapping familiar, culturally accepted ideas onto more complex issues, metaphors can legitimize certain ideologies while marginalizing others. Example: the nation as a family. In political discourse, nations are often conceptualized as families, with leaders portrayed as parental figures. For instance, phrases like the fatherland or the founding fathers evoke the metaphor of the nation as a family. This metaphor reinforces hierarchical power structures by positioning the government as the protective parent and citizens as dependent children, justifying paternalistic policies and centralizing authority. By naturalizing these relationships, such metaphors help maintain the status quo and discourage challenges to the existing power structures. Point 4. Critical discourse analysis and metaphor. In critical discourse analysis, CDA, metaphors are examined for their role in sustaining power dynamics and ideological control. CDA scholars argue that metaphors are not neutral. They are often used to shape public discourse in ways that serve particular interests, especially those of dominant groups. By analyzing metaphors, discourse analysts can expose how language reflects and reinforces social inequalities. Example: immigration as a flood. One common metaphor in media and political discourse frames immigration as a natural disaster, such as a flood or wave of migrants. This metaphor invokes fear and suggests that immigration is a threat to be controlled or resisted. It dehumanizes migrants by reducing them to an overwhelming force of nature and legitimizes restrictive immigration policies by portraying them as necessary defenses against an uncontrollable phenomenon. Critical discourse analysts would examine this metaphor to reveal its ideological underpinnings and its role in shaping anti-immigrant sentiment. Point 5. Cognitive and cultural aspects of metaphors. Metaphors are not only linguistic but also cognitive tools that reflect cultural worldviews. Different cultures may use different metaphors to conceptualize similar concepts, revealing the cultural specificity of metaphorical thinking. In discourse analysis, understanding the cognitive and cultural dimensions of metaphor helps explain how language reflects shared beliefs, values, and practices. Example: journey metaphors in personal growth. In many cultures, personal growth is metaphorically framed as a journey. Expressions like finding your path, overcoming obstacles, or reaching your goals conceptualize life experiences in terms of movement through space, where progress is marked by forward motion. This metaphor reflects cultural values related to self-improvement, perseverance, and achievement. In discourse analysis, examining such metaphors can reveal how cultural narratives about success and individualism are reinforced through everyday language. Point 6. Examples of metaphor in discourse analysis. Example 1. Health as war. In health discourse, illness is often framed as a battle, with metaphors like fighting cancer or battling a disease. This metaphor frames illness as an adversary, positioning patients as soldiers who must engage in combat. While this metaphor can empower individuals by emphasizing resilience, it can also lead to negative connotations when a patient is unable to win the battle, implying failure or defeat. Discourse analysts studying health communication might explore how the war on illness metaphor influences patient attitudes toward their treatment, medical decisions, and perceptions of responsibility for their health outcomes. Example 2. Climate change as a balance. In environmental discourse, metaphors of balance are often used to frame discussions about climate change. Phrases like restoring the balance of nature or tipping the scales of the ecosystem conceptualize the environment as a finely tuned system that can be thrown off balance by human actions. This metaphor emphasizes the fragility of ecosystems and the need for careful management. Discourse analysts might explore how this framing influences public understanding of climate change and whether it encourages more sustainable behaviors or policies. Example 3. Business as competition. In corporate discourse, business is often framed as a competitive sport or battle, with phrases like winning market share, outmaneuvering competitors, or strategic moves. This metaphor reflects capitalist ideologies that view the market as a competitive arena where success depends on outpacing rivals. Discourse analysis of this metaphor could reveal how it shapes corporate culture, reinforcing aggressive, profit-driven behaviors, and marginalizing alternative business models that prioritize collaboration or social responsibility. Conclusion. Metaphors in discourse analysis provide a window into the underlying cognitive and ideological frameworks that shape human thought and communication. Through metaphors, abstract and complex concepts are made more accessible, but in doing so, they also guide how we perceive, interpret, and act upon social issues. By studying metaphors, discourse analysts reveal how language reflects cultural values, frames social problems, and sustains power dynamics. Whether in political, health, environmental, or corporate discourse, metaphors play a crucial role in constructing meaning, influencing behavior, and shaping societal norms. Frequently asked questions. What role do metaphors play in discourse analysis? Metaphors in discourse analysis are seen as powerful cognitive tools that shape how people perceive, understand, and interact with the world. They allow individuals to conceptualize abstract ideas through more concrete terms, influencing thought and language. Metaphors reflect cultural norms, ideologies, and power relations, and discourse analysts study them to uncover hidden assumptions and ideological perspectives. What is conceptual metaphor theory, CMT? Conceptual metaphor theory, CMT, developed by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, posits that metaphors are not merely figures of speech but fundamental structures of human thought. CMT suggests that metaphors organize our perceptions and actions by mapping concepts from one domain, the source domain, onto another, the target domain. For example, in the metaphor, time is money, time, target domain, is understood in terms of money, source domain, influencing how we talk about and value time. How do source and target domains function in metaphors? In a metaphor, the source domain is the concrete concept used to understand the target domain, which is more abstract. The source domain provides familiar language to describe the target domain. For instance, in the metaphor, life is a journey. Journey is the source domain, and life is the target domain. This metaphor helps people conceptualize life in terms of progress, direction, and purpose. How do metaphors act as framing devices in discourse? Metaphors frame discourse by directing attention to certain aspects of reality while obscuring others. They influence how issues, events, or concepts are perceived and understood. For example, framing healthcare in economic terms with metaphors like shopping for doctors presents healthcare as a market transaction, shaping public perception and policy debates around a neoliberal ideology that treats healthcare as a commodity. What are the ideological functions of metaphors in discourse? Metaphors serve ideological functions by naturalizing particular ways of thinking and making certain power relations appear commonsensical. They map familiar ideas onto complex issues, legitimizing certain ideologies while marginalizing others. For example, the metaphor, the nation is a family, in political discourse positions government leaders as parental figures, reinforcing hierarchical power structures and paternalistic policies. How does critical discourse analysis, CDA, approach metaphors? In critical discourse analysis, CDA, metaphors are examined for their role in sustaining power dynamics and ideological control. CDA scholars argue that metaphors are not neutral. They shape public discourse in ways that serve particular interests, especially those of dominant groups. For instance, the metaphor, immigration as a flood, in media discourse dehumanizes migrants and legitimizes restrictive policies by portraying immigration as a threat. Can metaphors vary across different cultures? Yes, metaphors can vary across cultures, reflecting different worldviews and cultural values. Different cultures may use distinct metaphors to conceptualize similar concepts. For example, while personal growth is often metaphorically framed as a journey, in many Western cultures, other cultures might use different metaphors to reflect their unique narratives about success and individualism. How do metaphors influence policy and public perception? Metaphors can shape policy and public perception by framing issues in particular ways. For example, the metaphor, war on drugs, frames drug control as a military conflict, promoting aggressive, combat-oriented policies and influencing public perception to view drug-related issues as battles to be fought. This framing can overshadow alternative approaches, such as viewing drug addiction as a public health issue. How are war metaphors used in political discourse? War metaphors are commonly used in political discourse to frame conflicts, strategies, and policies. Phrases like war on drugs, fighting poverty, or battling climate change invoke the source domain of war to describe social issues. This framing suggests that these issues require conflict-oriented solutions, which can influence public perception and policy decisions toward more aggressive responses. What is an example of a metaphor used in healthcare discourse? In healthcare discourse, economic metaphors often frame patients as consumers and healthcare as a market. Phrases like shopping for doctors or healthcare providers compete for patients reflect a metaphor that aligns with neoliberal ideologies, viewing healthcare as a commodity. This metaphor influences policy discussions and shapes how patients perceive their relationship with healthcare providers. How do metaphors like the nation is a family reinforce power structures? Metaphors like the nation is a family reinforce power structures by positioning leaders as parental figures and citizens as dependent children. This metaphor supports hierarchical governance and justifies paternalistic policies, centralizing authority and maintaining the status quo. It naturalizes the idea of governmental authority as protective and necessary, discouraging challenges to existing power structures. What is the significance of the immigration as a flood metaphor? The immigration as a flood metaphor in media and political discourse portrays immigration as a natural disaster, invoking fear and suggesting that it is a threat that must be controlled. This framing dehumanizes migrants, reducing them to an overwhelming force, and legitimizes restrictive immigration policies by depicting them as necessary defenses against an uncontrollable phenomenon. How do metaphors reflect cultural values and worldviews? Metaphors reflect cultural values and worldviews by providing cognitive frameworks that shape how people understand and interact with the world. For example, metaphors like life is a journey reflect cultural narratives about progress, self-improvement, and individual achievement. In discourse analysis, studying these metaphors helps reveal how language encodes and reinforces shared beliefs and practices.